They say the best revenge is living well. Wrong. Real revenge is holding absolute power while your enemy drowns in his own arrogance. Grant thought he took my youth, career, and dignity. He expected me to take the bus to court and beg for scraps. But he did not know that what I found inside the walls of that rotting cabin was not just dust. This is how I turned a divorce petition into a death sentence for his career. My name is Ariana Whitaker. I was 38 years old, and until yesterday afternoon, I was the lead interior architect at Sterling & Hearth, one of the most prestigious design firms in Chicago. I dealt in load-bearing walls, structural integrity, and aesthetic perfection. I understood how to build things that lasted. I understood how to distribute weight so that a foundation would not crack, or at least, I thought I did. It was a Tuesday in mid-February, the kind of day where the wind off Lake Michigan feels less like air and more like a physical assault. The sky was a flat, bruised sheet of gray. I had come home early, a rare indulgence granted by a canceled client meeting. I remember the specific click of my heels on the marble floor of our foyer. It was the only sound in the penthouse apartment on Lakeshore Drive, a space I had designed myself. I had curated every texture, every light fixture, every line of sight to project warmth and stability. I walked into the master bedroom and found my husband, Grant, standing by the bed. He was not panic-stricken. He was not scrambling to hide a mistress or hastily throwing clothes into a bag. Grant was folding a silk tie with the same meticulous precision he used when closing a merger for his corporate law firm. 2 large suitcases lay open on the Egyptian cotton duvet. They were already packed, organized by color and fabric weight. "You are home early," Grant said. He did not look up. He smoothed the silk of the tie, placed it in the suitcase, and zipped the compartment shut. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "Grant?" I asked, my briefcase heavy in my hand. "Are you going on a trip?" "You did not mention a case in New York." He finally looked at me. His eyes were calm, devoid of any guilt or affection. They were the eyes of a man reviewing a contract he had already decided to terminate. "I am not going to New York. Ariana, I am leaving." I stood there, the cold from the street still clinging to my coat. "Leaving for how long?" "Permanently," he said. He walked to the dresser and picked up his watch, sliding it onto his wrist. "I filed the petition this morning. You will be served tomorrow. But since you are here, we might as well expedite the conversation." My brain could not process the data. It was like looking at a blueprint where the dimensions made no sense. "I do not understand. We just booked the summer house in the Hamptons. We were talking about—" "I was talking," Grant corrected me. "You were listening. That has always been the dynamic, has it not?" He turned to face me fully. "It is not working. Ariana, it has not worked for a long time. We are on different trajectories. To be blunt, we are no longer on the same level." "Different levels," I repeated. The absurdity of it made me laugh. A short, sharp sound that died instantly in the cold air. "I am a partner track architect. You are a senior associate. We built this life together for 10 years. "I built this life," Grant said. His voice was smooth, reasonable, and utterly lethal. "You decorated it, and now I am upgrading." He did not need to say her name. I knew it instantly. It was in the way he checked his phone, the subtle shift in his wardrobe over the last 3 months, the late nights at the firm. But Grant, being Grant, wanted to twist the knife. "Vanessa appreciates ambition," he said. The name hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. Vanessa Sterling. The 24-year-old daughter of Jonathan Sterling, the CEO of my company, the girl who had just started as a creative consultant 3 months ago, a girl who had never drawn a floor plan in her life but walked around the office like she owned the building, which, essentially, she did. "You are sleeping with my boss's daughter," I stated, my voice trembling not with sadness, but with a sudden, freezing shock. "I am building a future with a partner who can offer me more than just a well-designed living room," Grant replied. He closed the second suitcase and set it on the floor. "Now, regarding the separation, I expect this to be amicable. We both know the terms of the prenuptial agreement. The prenup? I remembered signing it 10 years ago. A week before our wedding, I was 28, blinded by love, trusting the man who swore he just wanted to protect his family's potential inheritance. I had signed it without legal counsel because I trusted him. I had signed away my rights to alimony, to any asset acquired during the marriage, to anything that was not solely in my name prior to the union. "You cannot be serious," I whispered. "I put every cent of my bonuses into this apartment. I paid for the renovations. I paid for the car." "The apartment is in my name," Grant said, checking his watch. "The Mercedes is leased in my name. The accounts are joint, but the primary contribution is traced to my salary. Under the terms of the agreement you signed, you leave with what you brought in." He paused, a cruel smirk touching the corner of his mouth. "Which, if I recall, is that rusting Honda Civic you keep in the secondary garage, and that rotting pile of lumber your grandmother left you in the middle of nowhere." "That is my inheritance," I snapped. "It is a termite farm," Grant countered, "but it is yours. Congratulations. You are a homeowner." He picked up the suitcases. He walked past me as if I were a piece of furniture that no longer fit the aesthetic of the room. At the door, he stopped. "I have canceled your access to the building effective tomorrow noon. I suggest you pack tonight. I would hate for security to have to get involved." He left. The door clicked shut. I stood alone in the silence of the apartment I had poured my soul into, realizing that the foundation had never been solid. It had been built on quicksand. I did not sleep. I spent the night packing my clothes into cardboard boxes I found in the storage closet. I moved like a ghost in my own home. I did not cry. The shock was too profound for tears. I felt a cold, hard numbness spreading through my limbs. The next morning, I dressed in my sharpest charcoal suit. I needed armor. I drove the old Honda Civic, which started with a reluctant cough, to the Sterling and Hearth Tower in downtown Chicago. I told myself that my marriage was over, but I still had my career. I was the lead architect on the River Point project. They needed me. Grant could take the house, but he could not take my talent. I swiped my badge at the turnstile. It beeped red. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. The security guard, a man named Mike, whom I had greeted every morning for 5 years, looked at me with pity. "I am sorry, Ms. Whitaker. I have been told to escort you to Human Resources immediately. There must be a mistake." "Mike," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Please, ma'am, do not make this hard." He walked me to the elevator, not the main one, but the service elevator. We rode up to the 40th floor in silence. When the doors opened, the director of Human Resources, a woman named Susan who had attended my holiday parties, was waiting. She did not smile. She did not offer me a seat. "Ariana," Susan said, standing behind her desk. She pushed a single sheet of paper toward me. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Sterling and Hearth is terminated for cause." "For cause?" I stared at her. "I have the highest billable hours in the department. My client satisfaction is 100%. What cause?" "Gross misconduct," Susan said, her eyes sliding away from mine. "Data leakage. We have evidence that you shared proprietary client blueprints with a competitor." "That is a lie," I said, my voice rising. "I have never shared a file outside this server. Show me the proof." "The investigation is internal and confidential," Susan said robotically. "Given the severity of the breach, we are foregoing the notice period. Security will escort you to your desk to collect personal essentials only. No electronic devices, no files." I looked past her, through the glass walls of her office, down the hall. Standing in the doorway of the CEO's office was Vanessa. She was wearing a white dress that looked ridiculous in a corporate setting. She was holding a latte and looking directly at me. She brought the cup to her lips, concealing a smile that did not reach her eyes. It was a setup, a coordinated execution. Grant had taken the home. Vanessa was taking the career. They were erasing me. "You cannot do this," I said to Susan. "I will sue." I would advise against that, Susan said, dropping her voice. Mr. Sterling is very upset about the leak. If you leave quietly, he will agree not to press criminal charges for corporate espionage. Sign the separation agreement. Ariana, take the severance of 2 weeks and go. 2 weeks. 15 years of loyalty for 2 weeks of pay and a threat of prison. I walked to my desk with Mike the security guard hovering 2 feet behind me. The open plan office went silent. 30 colleagues. People I had mentored. People I had covered for. People I had shared lunches with. Turned their heads away. They studied their screens with intense fascination. No one wanted to make eye contact with the dead woman walking. I put a framed photo of my parents, my favorite drafting pen, and a small cactus into a box. That was it. That was the sum total of my career. Let's go. Ma'am, Mike said softly. The walk to the elevator felt like a funeral procession. As the doors closed, I saw Vanessa one last time. She was leaning against my desk, my former desk, chatting with my junior associate. She had already replaced me. I walked out of the building and into the biting wind. It was 10 in the morning. The city was moving, alive with commerce and ambition, and I was standing on the sidewalk holding a cardboard box. I walked to the parking garage. I needed gas. I needed to get away from this building. I slid my credit card into the pump. Declined. I frowned and tried my debit card. The joint account where my paycheck was deposited. Declined. Contact issuer. I pulled out my phone and logged into the banking app. The screen flashed red. Account frozen. Please contact the primary account holder. Grant. He had not waited for the court order. He had used his legal connections to freeze everything, likely claiming suspicious activity or leveraging some clause in that damned prenup about joint assets during a dispute. I checked my wallet. I had $42 in cash and a quarter tank of gas. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Grant. I assume you have been briefed by HR. Do not come back to the apartment. The locks have been changed. Your things are in storage. I will send you the bill. I sat in the driver's seat of the rusted Honda, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could not scream. I could not breathe. The pressure in my chest was absolute. I had no home. I had no job. I had no money. I had no reputation. In the span of 16 hours, I had been systematically dismantled. I had nowhere to go. No friends I could trust. They were all our friends. Or worse, colleagues who now thought I was a corporate spy. My parents were gone. Then I remembered the key on my ring, the small brass key I had kept out of sentimentality. The cabin. Grant had called it a rotting pile of lumber. He was not wrong. It was 2 hours north, past the suburbs, past the gentrified developments, deep in the woods near the Wisconsin border. My grandmother had left it to me when she passed, and we had never touched it. I started the car. The engine whined in protest. I drove north. The city faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the flat, gray expanse of the highway. The further I drove, the colder it got. Snow began to fall. Small, hard pellets that hissed against the windshield. The heater in the Honda was broken. It blew only lukewarm air that smelled of dust and old oil. I buttoned my coat to my chin, shivering. By the time I reached the turnoff, it was 1 in the afternoon. The road to the cabin was unpaved, a rutted track covered in dead leaves and ice. The car skidded twice, the tires struggling for grip. I saw the cabin through the bare trees. It looked like a bruised eye in the forest. The wood was gray and warped. The roof sagged dangerously on the left side. The front porch listed to the right. It was a ruin. I parked the car and stepped out. The silence was deafening. There was no hum of traffic, no distant sirens, only the wind rattling the dry branches of the oak trees. The cold here was sharper, cleaner, and more cruel. I unlocked the front door. It stuck, swollen with dampness, and I had to throw my shoulder against it to force it open. The smell hit me first, mouse droppings, and the stale, freezing air of a place that had been abandoned for a decade. I stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under my boots. The main room was small. dominated by a stone fireplace that looked like it might collapse if I looked at it wrong. There was an old sofa covered in a dusty sheet, a wooden table with 3 legs, and shadows that seemed to stretch out from the corners. There was no electricity. I flipped the switch, and nothing happened. No heat, no water. I walked to the center of the room and dropped my box of office supplies on the floor. My breath came out in white clouds. It was colder inside than it was outside. I sank down onto the dusty floor, pulling my knees to my chest. My Armani suit, designed for boardrooms and climate-controlled penthouses, offered no protection against this reality. I was shivering violently now, my teeth chattering. Grant was warm. He was likely sitting in his office, ordering lunch, laughing with Vanessa about how easy it had been to dispose of me. He thought he had won, and looking around this desolate, freezing shack, with $40 in my pocket and a ruined name, I had to admit he was right. I was at zero. I was less than zero. I was debris. I wrapped my arms around myself, rocking back and forth in the silence, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the walls, waiting for the tears that still refused to come. The only thing I felt was the cold. It seeped into my bones, into my heart, turning everything to ice. Survival became a mathematical equation. It was a calculation of calories in versus calories out, of thermal units required to keep a human body from freezing versus the cost of propane for the ancient space heater I had salvaged from the shed. The first week in the cabin was a blur of physical misery. The silence of the forest was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against the thin glass of the windows like a physical weight. I spent my days wrapped in 3 layers of wool, pacing the small perimeter of the main room to keep my blood moving. My bank account remained frozen. My credit cards were useless plastic rectangles. I had $42 when I arrived. That lasted 3 days. On the 4th day, I drove the rattling Honda into the nearest town, a place called Blackwood that consisted of a gas station, a diner, and a pawn shop with barred windows. I walked into the shop with my head held high, though I felt hollow inside. I placed my diamond earrings on the counter. They were a 10th anniversary gift from Grant. He had presented them to me over dinner at Alinea, telling me they matched the sparkle in my eyes. $300, the pawnbroker said. He did not even look at me with sympathy. He looked at the diamonds, then at my face, and saw exactly what I was, a desperate woman with no leverage. They are worth $5,000, I said, my voice cracking slightly. $300, he repeated. Take it or leave it. I took it. I took the $300 and bought canned soup, bottled water, a flashlight, and enough propane to run the heater for a week. I felt like I was selling pieces of my soul to buy time. My phone was my only connection to the world I had lost, and it had become an instrument of torture. Grant did not call. He texted. His messages were concise, drafted like legal memos. I have authorized a one-time humanitarian transfer of $5,000 to a prepaid card. He wrote on Tuesday, "It is waiting for you at the firm's front desk. Sign the waiver renouncing all claims to the marital assets, and the card is yours. It is enough to get you an apartment in whatever hole you are hiding in. Do not be stubborn. Ariana, you have no options." I did not reply. The thought of walking back into that lobby, past the security guards who had escorted me out, past Vanessa's smug smile, just to beg for a pittance was more painful than the hunger gnawing at my stomach. But silence was not my only enemy. I tried to find work. I sat in the freezing cabin, using the spotty cellular data to email every contact I had in the industry. I had built a 15-year career. I had won awards. Surely, someone would hire me. The responses came back with brutal speed. Most were automated rejections, but one came from David, a developer I had worked with for years, a man I considered a friend. Ariana. He wrote, "I cannot hire you. Word is out that you sold Sterling and Hearth blueprints to the Chinese. Grant and Vanessa are telling everyone you are unstable and facing federal charges. You are radioactive. Do not email me again." I stared at the screen until the backlight dimmed and died. They were not just content with taking my present. They were burning my future to the ground. They wanted me destitute. They wanted me to crawl back to Grant and sign his papers just to survive, to keep from screaming. I worked. I am an architect. I understand structures. I understand that when a foundation is rotten, you do not paint over it. You tear it out. The cabin was falling apart, and fixing it became my obsession. It was the only thing in my life I could control. I started with the fireplace. It was a massive, ugly thing built of river stone, dominating the north wall. It drew smoke into the room instead of venting it out. And the masonry was crumbling. I found a rusted sledgehammer and a chisel in the shed. I did not have proper safety gear, so I tied a scarf around my face and put on a pair of old gardening gloves. I attacked the stone. Clang. That was for the prenup. Clang. That was for the humiliating escort out of the building. Clang. That was for Vanessa. The physical exertion was addictive. It warmed my muscles and quieted the screaming in my head. Dust coated my hair and filled my lungs. But I did not stop. I worked until my hands blistered and my shoulders burned. It was late afternoon on my 10th day in the cabin when the sound changed. I was chipping away at the mortar behind the main hearth, trying to expose the flue to see why it was blocked. I swung the hammer against a section of brickwork that looked oddly misaligned. Instead of the dull thud of solid masonry, the impact echoed. Thunk! It sounded hollow. I paused, wiping sweat and grit from my forehead. I tapped the brick again. Thunk! Architectural curiosity overrode my exhaustion. Chimneys were solid structures. There should not be a void behind the firebox unless it was a structural flaw or intentional. I shone my flashlight into the crack I had made. The mortar here was different, darker, more brittle than the rest. It had been added later. I swung the hammer with renewed focus. The bricks gave way easily, tumbling inward into a dark space. I cleared the debris and peered inside. It was not a structural flaw. It was a small, intentional chamber, about 2 feet wide and 2 feet deep, built into the dead space between the chimney and the exterior wall. It was a hiding hole, and it was not empty. Sitting in the center of the dusty void was a metal chest. It was not large, perhaps the size of a modern briefcase, made of heavy steel that had rusted to a deep, flaky orange. It looked ancient. My heart began to beat a rhythm against my ribs that had nothing to do with exertion. I reached in. The box was heavy, heavier than it looked. I dragged it out, scraping it across the stone hearth, and set it on the floor. The design was distinct. It had heavy iron latches and a thick handle. It looked like the strong boxes used in bank transport vans from the 1920s. I sat back on my heels, staring at it. My grandmother had never mentioned a safe. She had never mentioned money. She had lived a simple life as a librarian, dying with barely enough in her savings to cover her funeral. But her father, my great-grandfather, Silas, was a different story. The family lore about Silas was vague, filtered through generations of whispers. I knew he had lived in Chicago during the Roaring '20s. I knew he had been a driver. The family joke was that he drove a milk truck, but my grandmother would always get a strange, dark look in her eyes and correct us. He drove for important men. She would say, dangerous men. That is why we do not talk about him. I looked at the rusted box. Silas had built this cabin in 1928. He had come up here ostensibly to hunt, but maybe he had come to hide something. The lock on the front was a simple padlock, completely fused by rust. I picked up the chisel and the hammer. One sharp strike to the hasp, and the metal snapped with a dry crunch. I took a breath. My hands were shaking. I expected to find old tools, maybe some rot-eaten family photos, or perhaps nothing but dust and spiderwebs. I lifted the lid. The hinges screamed in protest. Inside, the box was lined with oilcloth that had turned stiff and black with age. I peeled back the fabric. There was no gold. There were no stacks of cash. My stomach dropped with disappointment. It was paper. Just stacks of thick, yellowed paper bound together with twine that had long since disintegrated. I reached for the top stack. The paper felt heavy, textured like currency, with intricate engravings along the borders. I held it up to the fading afternoon light filtering through the dirty window. It was a certificate, at the top, in ornate Gothic script. It read, Consolidated Atlantic Rail Steel. Below that 1,000 shares, and below that, the words that made my breath catch in my throat. Bearer certificate. I knew enough about finance from living with Grant to know what this was. In the modern world, stocks are digital entries. They have names attached to them. But 80 or 90 years ago, a bearer share was like cash. Whoever held the physical paper owned the stock. There was no registry, no name. Possession was 100% of the law. I flipped through the stack. Union Stockyards Transit, Midwest Iron Works, Chicago Eastern Illinois Railroad. There were dozens of them, maybe 100 certificates in total. I dug deeper into the box. Underneath the papers was a small black notebook bound in leather that had cracked like dry earth. I opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting neat, sharp cursive and faded fountain pen ink, but it was gibberish. Row 4, Section 8. Bluebird flies north. Delivery 12. The saint pays double. It was a ledger, or a diary, but it was coded. I sat back, surrounded by the cold dust of the cabin, holding a piece of paper dated October 14th, 1926. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, hysterical and jagged. I was sitting in a freezing shack, wearing dirty clothes, holding stock certificates for companies that probably ceased to exist before I was born. Consolidated Atlantic Rail Steel. It sounded like a Monopoly board game property. These were likely worthless. They were souvenirs from a dead era. Memorabilia that might fetch $50 on eBay if I was lucky. Grant was right. I was sitting in a pile of trash. But then I looked at the certificate again. The paper was pristine, protected by the oilcloth and the dry, airless environment of the chimney seal. It looked official. It looked serious. And I remembered the look in my grandmother's eyes when she talked about Silas. He drove for dangerous men. Dangerous men did not hide worthless paper in secret compartments. Dangerous men hid things that had value, things they wanted to come back for. I grabbed my phone. I had 6% battery left. I opened Google and typed in Consolidated Atlantic Rail Steel History. The loading circle spun and spun. The signal was weak. Finally, a block of text appeared. Consolidated Atlantic Rail Steel. Defunct 1945. Assets acquired by Northern Industrial. I typed in Northern Industrial. Northern Industrial merged with General Foundry. 1960 to form GFI Corp. GFI Corp. Acquired by Omnicorp Global in 1988. My thumb hovered over the screen. Omnicorp Global. I knew that name. Everyone knew that name. It was one of the largest industrial conglomerates in the world. They built bridges, skyscrapers, and defense systems. Their stock was trading at over $200 a share. If these companies had merged, if the stock had split, if these bearer shares were still valid, the phone died. The screen went black. I sat in the gathering darkness, the silence of the forest rushing back in. I looked at the rusted box, then at the pile of yellowed paper. I did not know if I was holding a fortune or kindling for the fire. I did not know if I was rich or just a fool with a box of antique scrap. But for the first time in 10 days, the crushing weight on my chest lightened. Grant thought he had taken everything. He thought he had left me with nothing but a rotting house. He was wrong. He had left me with a mystery. I gathered the papers carefully, wrapping them back in the oilcloth. I placed the box under the sofa, hidden from view. Then I lit the propane heater. The blue flame hissed to life. I was cold. I was hungry. And I was alone. But as I stared at the flickering light, I felt something I had not felt since the moment I walked into my bedroom and saw the suitcases. I felt a pulse. Tomorrow, I would find out what this was. Tomorrow, I would stop crying and start digging. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I did not dream of the life I had lost. I dreamed of the numbers in the notebook, dancing like a code waiting to be broken. Information is a weapon, but only if you control the channel through which it flows. Grant was a litigator. He lived his life gathering digital breadcrumbs, credit card swipes, GPS pings, IP addresses. If I researched the value of 1920s stock certificates on my phone, the data would pass through our shared family plan. He would see the search history. He would see the sudden interest in historical finance. And being the predator that he was, he would ask why. I could not afford why. I needed silence. I drove 3 towns over to a public library in Kenosha. It was a brutalist concrete block from the 70s, smelling of floor wax and damp wool. I paid for a guest pass using a handful of quarters I found in the Honda's glove compartment. Ensuring my name appeared on no digital logs, I found a terminal in the back corner, away from the prying eyes of the librarian. I pulled the black notebook and the list of companies I had transcribed from the certificates out of my bag. My hands were trembling, not from the cold this time, but from a vibrating tension that felt like electricity arcing under my skin. I started with the names on the certificates: Consolidated Atlantic Rail and Steel, Union Stockyards and Transit, Midwest Ironworks. The internet is a graveyard of dead companies, but it is also a genealogy chart for the survivors. I spent 4 hours tracing the bloodlines of these corporate entities. It was like following a river upstream, watching it merge with tributaries, grow wider, change names, and eventually empty into an ocean. Consolidated Atlantic had not gone bankrupt. In 1945, it was acquired in a hostile takeover by Northern Industrial. I followed Northern Industrial. In 1960, they merged with General Foundry to create GFY Corporation. I kept digging. The screen glared white in my tired eyes. GFI Corporation had a massive run in the 80s, cornering the market on military-grade steel. Then, in 1988, they were absorbed by the Leviathan, Omnicorp Global. I sat back in the hard plastic chair, the breath leaving my lungs in a sharp hiss. Omnicorp. They were everywhere. They built the bridge I drove over to get here. They manufactured the engines in the jets flying out of O'Hare. They were a Fortune 50 conglomerate with a market capitalization in the hundreds of billions. I looked at the notes I had scribbled. If the paper trail was accurate, every single share of Consolidated Atlantic from 1928 had been converted, split, and reconverted through every merger. I typed a new search query: are pre-1930 bearer shares still valid? The results were dense with legal jargon, but the answer was singular and shocking. Bearer shares are unregistered. The issuing firm does not know who owns them. The physical certificate is the only proof of ownership. Whoever holds the paper holds the asset. Most jurisdictions had banned them in the 21st century to stop money laundering, but there were grandfather clauses. If the original bylaws of the company allowed for them, and if they had never been canceled or reported lost, they were legal tender in the eyes of the corporation. They were ghosts, and I was holding a graveyard full of them. I turned to the notebook. The code that had frustrated me the night before now seemed less like gibberish and more like a map. I cross-referenced the dates in the diary with historical events in Chicago. October 14th, 1931. The big fellow is worried about the tax man. He says the vaults are not safe. I am to hold the heavy paper until the heat dies down. The big fellow. My blood ran cold. In Chicago history, there was only one big fellow, Al Capone. I read on. My great-grandfather, Silas, was not just a driver. He was a courier, a stash man. The entries detailed late-night drives to Cicero, meetings in back rooms of jazz clubs, and the transfer of packages that were too hot for the banks. The entry from May 3rd, 1932 was the last one that mentioned the box. He is gone. They took him on tax evasion. The outfit is scrambling. No one knows I have the box. If I give it back now, they will kill me to tie up the loose end. If I keep it, I am sitting on a bomb. I will bury it in the wall. I will wait. Silas had waited. He had waited while Capone rotted in Alcatraz. He had waited while the mob reshuffled. He had waited until he died of a heart attack in 1955, taking the secret to his grave. My grandmother had grown up in that house, completely unaware that she was sleeping inches away from the mafia's retirement fund. I did the math in my head. trying to calculate the stock splits. One share of Consolidated Atlantic in 1928, after nearly 100 years of mergers and 2-for-1 splits, would be roughly equivalent to 400 shares of Omnicorp today. I had 1,000 shares of Consolidated Atlantic and 2,000 shares of Midwest Ironworks and 500 of Union Stockyards. I pulled up the current trading price of Omnicorp, $212.40. I tapped the calculator app on the library computer. I punched in the numbers. I stared at the result. I cleared the screen and did it again. The number did not change. $18 million. Give or take market fluctuations and legal fees. I was looking at nearly $20 million in assets. I felt nauseous. The library spun around me. This was not a lottery win. This was a death sentence. I was holding $20 million that technically belonged to the Chicago outfit, or at least their spiritual successors. And if not them, the federal government would want to seize it as proceeds of crime. And if not them, Omnicorp would fight tooth and nail to declare the certificates void to avoid the payout. I needed a lawyer, but not just any lawyer. If I walked into a standard firm in the Loop, they would run a conflict check. Grant's name would come up, or they would be friends with Grant. The legal circle in Chicago is incestuous. Everyone drinks at the same bars. If I showed this to a reputable banker, they would have to file a suspicious activity report immediately. The IRS would descend on me within 48 hours. I needed someone who understood complex financial forensics, but operated on the fringe. Someone who hated the establishment as much as I currently did. And then, I remembered Julian Vance, 3 years ago. Sterling and Hearth had been involved in a minor dispute over a commercial lease. The opposing party had hired Julian Vance as an expert witness to value the property. Julian was brilliant, a forensic accountant who could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar ledger. But he was abrasive, disheveled, and had a problem with authority. Grant had cross-examined him. I remembered sitting in the gallery, watching Grant tear Julian apart not on the facts, but on his character. Grant had mocked Julian's cheap suit, his stutter when he got excited, and his lack of a pedigree degree. Grant had destroyed Julian's credibility to win a case that was barely worth winning, just for the sport of it. Julian had lost his contract with the major firms after that. He had been blacklisted. He would hate Grant. He would hate the system that cast him out. I printed my search history to clear the cache, then shredded the papers in the recycling bin outside. I walked to my car. The wind was picking up, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I felt the heat of the metal box in the trunk. I drove south. The drive from the Wisconsin border to Chinatown took 2 hours in the slushy traffic. I watched my rearview mirror the entire way, convinced that a black SUV was following me. Paranoia is a side effect of holding a fortune that does not belong to you. Julian's office was not in a glass tower. It was on the second floor of a faded brick building on Wentworth Avenue, sandwiched between a dim sum palace and a foot massage parlor. The stairs smelled of 5-spice powder and damp carpet. I knocked on the door. The frosted glass read, Vance Financial Analytics in peeling black letters. "Go away," a voice shouted from inside. "I am not buying Girl Scout cookies." "Julian," I called out. "It is Ariana Whitaker." Silence, then the sound of heavy footsteps. The door yanked open. Julian Vance looked worse than I remembered. He was wearing a wrinkled linen shirt that had probably been white 3 days ago, and his dark hair was standing up in tufts as if he had been pulling at it. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing behind thick-rimmed glasses. "Whitaker," he spat the name. "Grant Whitaker's wife, or should I say, the architect of my public humiliation." "Ex-wife," I corrected. "Or soon to be. Can I come in?" "No." He moved to slam the door. "I do not talk to Whitakers. You people are a contagion." "I have something that will interest you," I said quickly, jamming my boot in the doorframe. "It involves financial history, and it involves screwing over the establishment." Julian paused. Curiosity warred with resentment in his eyes. "I am busy, Ariana. I am currently auditing a laundromat for the IRS. It is thrilling work." "I found something in a wall," I said. "Paper, 1920s paper." He rolled his eyes. If you found war bonds, take them to a bank. I am not an appraiser." "Not bonds," I said, lowering my voice. "Bearer shares. Consolidated Atlantic Rail and Steel. Signed 1928. Julian froze. His hand, which had been pushing against the door, went slack. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, he saw the cheap coat, the exhaustion in my face, the desperation, but mostly, he heard the name of the company. "Consolidated Atlantic," he whispered. That is the foundation stone of Omnicorp." "I have 1,000 shares," I said. He stared at me for 5 full seconds. Then he opened the door wide. "Get in." His office was a chaos of paper. Stacks of files covered every surface of the desk, the chairs, the floor. It looked like the mind of a madman exploded into physical form. He swept a pile of tax forms off a guest chair. "Sit," he commanded. "Show me." I reached into my bag and pulled out the single certificate I had brought with me. I had left the rest in the trunk, hidden under the spare tire. I was desperate, but I was not stupid. I placed the certificate on his desk. Julian did not touch it immediately. He put on a pair of white cotton gloves that he pulled from a drawer. He turned on a high-intensity desk lamp and leaned over the paper. He examined the ink, the watermark, the signatures. He pulled out a jeweler's loupe and inspected the serial number. The room was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator in the corner and the distant traffic of Chinatown. I watched his face. His expression shifted from skepticism to focus, and then to something akin to religious terror. He sat back, exhaling a cloud of breath that smelled of stale coffee. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Is it real?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the cluttered room. "It is real," Julian said. He looked at the certificate with a mixture of lust and fear. "The engraving is intaglio. The paper has the correct rag content for the era. The signatures match the board of directors from 1928. This is a legitimate, uncancelled bearer instrument. What is it worth?" "On the surface." Julian laughed, a high manic sound. "Nothing. It is a piece of history. But legally, if we can trace the corporate lineage, if we can prove chain of custody without tripping over the fact that it has been missing for 90 years. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "You said you have 1,000 shares." "And others," I said. "Midwest Iron Works, Union Stockyards, all from the same stash." Julian stood up and walked to the window. He peeked through the blinds, looking down at the street, checking for the same things I had been checking for. "Where did you get these?" "Ariana," he asked without turning around. "My great-grandfather," I said. "He drove for Al Capone." Julian whipped around. "Capone, you are telling me this is outfit money unlaundered. Original mob equity." "Yes." He walked back to the desk and looked at the paper again. He ran a gloved finger along the edge of the certificate. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" he asked softly. "I think I have found a way to start over." I said, "Start over." Julian shook his head. He looked at the door, then walked over and threw the deadbolt. He engaged a secondary chain lock. Then he went to the window and pulled the heavy velvet curtains shut, plunging the room into semi-darkness illuminated only by the desk lamp. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the harsh white light. The bitterness was gone from his eyes, replaced by the adrenaline of a man who has spent his life solving puzzles and has just been handed the Enigma code. "Ariana," he said, his voice trembling with the magnitude of the situation. "You have not found a way to start over. You have walked into my office with a nuclear bomb strapped to your chest. If the wrong people find out this exists, Omnicorp will bury you in litigation for 50 years. If the other wrong people find out, you will simply vanish." He picked up the certificate and held it to the light one last time. "But," he grinned, and it was a wolfish, dangerous grin, "if we do this right, if we structure this correctly, you will not just be rich, you will be a god." He sat down and pulled a fresh legal pad toward him. "Talk," he said. "Tell me everything, and do not leave out a single detail about Grant, because if we are going to detonate this bomb, I want to make sure he is standing at ground zero." "So, here's the problem," Julian said. He was pacing the length of his cramped office, dodging stacks of files like they were landmines. "Technically, you are rich. In the eyes of the corporate bylaws of 1928, you are a majority shareholder of a ghost entity that owns a significant chunk of a modern giant. But practically, you are radioactive." He stopped and pointed a chopstick at me. We were eating takeout from the place downstairs because I could not afford anything else. And Julian apparently lived on sodium and rage. "If you walk into a Chase bank with those certificates," he continued, chewing rapidly, "the teller triggers a suspicious activity report. The FBI freezes the assets pending an investigation into money laundering. Omnicorp gets wind of it. And their legal team, which is bigger than the population of this neighborhood, files an injunction claiming the shares were stolen, lost, or canceled 50 years ago. By the time you prove they are valid, you will be 80 years old and living under a bridge." "So they are worthless," I said, feeling the hope drain out of me. "No," Julian grinned, and a piece of broccoli fell onto his shirt. He ignored it. "They are difficult. There is a difference. We cannot cash them in America. The system here is designed to protect incumbents like Omnicorp. We need a jurisdiction that respects the sanctity of the bearer instrument over the convenience of the corporation." "Switzerland," I guessed. "Switzerland," he confirmed. "Specifically, a private bank in Zurich that specializes in legacy assets. They have a process for this. They verify the paper, they trace the lineage, and they convert the physical shares into a digital holding within a blind trust. Once it is in the trust, it is just money, clean, unassailable, Swiss neutral money, but getting there is not free." He sat down and started scribbling figures on a napkin. "We need flights. We need a retainer for the Swiss legal team. We need to pay the authentication fees up front. And I need a new suit, because they will not let me in the door wearing this." He looked up at me. "I calculate we need $40,000. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "Julian, I have $300 and a prepaid gas card. I cannot even afford the cab ride to O'Hare." "You have the cabin," he said. I froze. "The cabin. It is a ruin. You said so yourself." "The land is not," Julian tapped the desk. 40 acres near the Wisconsin border. It is not prime real estate, but it is worth something. I have a contact, a hard money lender who buys distressed properties for cash. No questions. Closing in 48 hours. He will lowball you. He will probably offer $60,000 for a property worth $100,000. But he will wire the money same day." My stomach turned. That cabin was the only thing I had left. It was the place where I found the shares. It was the last piece of my grandmother, and it was the only roof over my head. "If I sell it," I said slowly, "I am homeless, truly homeless. If this Swiss plan fails, I have nowhere to go." Julian leaned forward. His eyes were dark and serious behind his glasses. "Ariana, you are already homeless. You are just sleeping inside a memory. Do you want to keep the shack? Or do you want the weapon that burns Grant's house down?" He knew exactly which button to press. "Sell it," I said. The transaction was brutal and fast. Julian's contact, a man who smelled of cigars and desperation, bought the property through an LLC. I signed the deed on a coffee table in a Starbucks. I walked out with a cashier's check for $58,000. I deposited the money into a new account at a credit union. Julian recommended one too small to be on Grant's radar. But Grant was a lawyer. He had alerts set up on public records. 2 hours after the deed was recorded. My phone buzzed. "I see you sold the hovel." The text read, $58,000. "You were ripped off. Ariana. But I suppose desperation makes for poor negotiating. Enjoy the cash. It should last you 6 months if you are careful. Just sign the papers, and I will add the $5,000 bonus. Do not drag this out." I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the keypad. Every instinct in my body wanted to scream at him, to tell him I was coming for him, to tell him he was a fool. "Do not do it," Julian said. He was looking over my shoulder, reading the text. "If you fight back now, he keeps his guard up. We need him arrogant. We need him to think you are broken." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I typed, "I had no choice. Grant, I have to eat. Please, just give me a few more weeks to find a place to live before we finalize everything. I am begging you." I hit send. It felt like swallowing glass. Grant's reply came instantly. "Fine. 3 weeks. Then I file for a default judgment." "Do not test me." "Good," Julian said, turning back to his laptop. "He thinks you are defeated. Now, let's go to the airport." We flew economy. I, who used to fly business class to Milan for design expos, was squeezed into a middle seat between a crying toddler and a man who fell asleep on my shoulder before the plane even taxied. Julian sat across the aisle, reading a dossier on Swiss banking laws. Seemingly immune to discomfort, we landed in Zurich at 6 in the morning. The city was gray, precise, and intimidatingly clean. We took a train to the banking district. I looked at my reflection in the train window. I looked tired. My coat was fraying at the cuffs. I did not look like a woman carrying $18 million in a waterproof satchel. I looked like a tourist who had lost her way. "That is the point," Julian whispered, noticing my scrutiny. "Wealth whispers, Ariana, but old money, real power. It does not even speak. It just is. You are not a tourist. You are an eccentric heiress who has fallen on hard times and is reclaiming her birthright. Act the part." The bank was a nondescript building on the Bahnhofstrasse. No neon signs, no ATM lobby, just a heavy brass plaque with a name that dated back to Napoleon. We were ushered into a private meeting room that smelled of beeswax and old money. The walls were lined with mahogany. The silence was absolute. 3 bankers sat across from us. They were impeccable. Unsmiling men who looked like they had been born in 3-piece suits. Julian did the talking. He spoke their language, a dialect of tax codes, international treaties, and custodial chains. I sat silently. The metal box on the table between us. When I opened it, the lead banker, a man named Herr Müller, did not gasp. He merely adjusted his spectacles. He put on white gloves, just as Julian had done, and began the examination. It took 8 hours. 8 hours of sitting in that room, drinking espresso from porcelain cups, watching them scan, verify, and cross-reference. They called in a document historian. They called in a chemical analyst to test the ink. They made calls to archives in New York and Chicago. The tension was physical. I felt like I was being dissected. Every minute that ticked by was a minute where they could say fraud and call the police. I thought about the cabin I had sold. I thought about the car I was living in. I thought about Grant's text. Finally, at 4 in the afternoon, Herr Müller placed the last certificate back on the table. He folded his hands. "Frau Whitaker," he said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "The authentication is complete." I held my breath. Julian stopped tapping his foot. "The certificates are genuine," Mueller said. "Consolidated Atlantic Rail and Steel. Series 1928. We have traced the corporate actions. After the mergers with Northern Industrial, GFI, and finally Omnicorp Global, and accounting for the 72 stock splits and dividend reinvestment programs that were automatic for bearer instruments of this class." He slid a single piece of paper across the mahogany table. "The current market value of your holdings is $18,422,106 United States dollars." I looked at the number, 18,422,106. I waited for the joy. I waited for the relief to flood through me, for the tears to come, for the urge to jump up and hug Julian. But nothing happened. I felt cold. It was a different kind of cold than the freezing cabin. This was the cold of a glacier. It was solid. It was heavy. It was impenetrable. "We can establish the structure immediately," Mueller continued. A Liechtenstein foundation to hold the assets. With a Swiss bank account for liquidity, the account will be numbered. Your name will appear nowhere on the public registry. You will be provided with a debit card and a secure portal for transfers. Is this acceptable? Yes, I said. My voice did not shake. It sounded deeper, steadier than it had in weeks. Excellent. We just need a name for the holding company. I looked at Julian. He was grinning, a wild, victorious look in his eyes. But I did not smile back. I thought about Grant. I thought about Vanessa. I thought about the prenup he had waved in my face, the security guard escorting me out, the way he had dismissed me as a termite farm owner. Nemesis, I said. Mueller paused, his pen hovering over the document. Nemesis, the Greek goddess of retribution. Yes, I said. Nemesis Holdings. The paperwork took another hour. When we finally walked out of the bank, it was night. The streetlights of Zurich reflected off the wet pavement. I had a black metal card in my pocket. It looked like nothing, but it was the key to a nuclear arsenal. We did it, Julian breathed. Leaning against a stone wall, he looked exhausted, his adrenaline crashing. My God, Ariana, we actually did it. You are rich. No, I said, buttoning my frayed coat against the wind. I am not rich. Julian, rich is buying a summer house. Rich is flying first class. I turned to look at him, and for the first time, I saw him flinch slightly at the expression on my face. I am not rich, I repeated. I am armed. Julian straightened up, adjusting his glasses. Okay, that is a terrifying distinction. So, what is the first move? Do we hire a legal team? Do we buy a villa? We go home, I said, walking toward the tram station. And we wait. Grant wants a divorce. I am going to give him the most expensive divorce in the history of Illinois. And the fee? Julian asked, trotting to keep up with me. My fee? 5%, I said without breaking stride. $900,000, wired to an account of your choice tomorrow morning. Julian stopped in his tracks. 5. We agreed on 2. I am giving you a raise, I said, because I need you for the next part. And for the next part, Julian, you are going to have to do things that might make you uncomfortable. I audited the mob in the 90s, Julian shouted after me. I do not get uncomfortable. I glanced back at him. We will see. I touched the card in my pocket again. Grant thought he had broken me. He thought he was playing chess with a pigeon. He had no idea that while he was busy capturing pawns, I had just bought the entire board. The flight back to Chicago was long, but I did not sleep. I stared out the window at the black ocean below, plotting. The numbness was gone. The despair was gone. In their place was a clarity so sharp it felt like a blade. I was coming home, and I was bringing the winter with me. I returned to Chicago not as a conquering hero, but as a ghost. To the world, and specifically to Grant, I was still the destitute ex-wife living on the fringes of society. I rented a studio apartment in Rogers Park, a neighborhood far removed from the gold-plated zip code of our former penthouse. The apartment smelled of boiled cabbage and damp drywall. The radiator clanked like a dying engine, and the view from the single window was a brick wall covered in graffiti. It was perfect. Every morning. I woke up at 5 on a mattress on the floor. I drank instant coffee. I wore oversized sweatpants. I drove the rusting Honda Civic to the grocery store, paying with coupons and counting out change for the cashier. I played the role of the broken woman so well that even I sometimes forgot the black metal card hidden in the lining of my boot. But while Ariana the victim was clipping coupons, Ariana the CEO of Nemesis Holdings was waging a silent war. My first expenditure was not a car or a house. It was a retainer fee of $50,000 wired to the New York law firm of Blackwood. Stone Sterling. They were not just lawyers. They were legal assassins. They were the firm that Fortune 500 CEOs called when they wanted to dismantle a competitor without leaving a fingerprint. More importantly, they were the direct rivals of Grant's firm. They hated each other with the special kind of venom reserved for the elite. I met with my lead counsel, a woman named Eleanor Stone, via an encrypted video call on a burner laptop Julian had secured. Mrs. Whitaker, Eleanor said. She was 60, with silver hair cut like a helmet and eyes that had seen everything. I have reviewed the file. Your husband has frozen your assets, defamed your professional reputation, and is attempting to force a settlement under duress. Standard bully tactics. I do not want a settlement. Eleanor, I said, sipping my instant coffee in the dim light of my studio. I want total capitulation. I want him to sign the divorce decree thinking he has won, and then I want to peel his life apart layer by layer. We can do that, Eleanor replied, a small, cold smile touching her lips. We will draft a counter-strategy. We will appear at the final hearing, but until then, we stay dark. Let him think you are unrepresented. Let him get sloppy. He is already sloppy, I said. He is arrogant. Arrogance is our best witness, she agreed, with the legal Shark Tank secured. I turned my attention to the physical vessel. Grief and stress had stripped weight from me, leaving me gaunt. I needed to rebuild the architecture of my own body. I joined a 24-hour gym 3 blocks away, a place that smelled of sweat and iron. Populated by insomniacs and shift workers, I trained with a violence that frightened me. I lifted weights until my muscles screamed. I ran on the treadmill until my lungs burned, visualizing Grant's face with every footfall. I hired a private boxing coach, a retired fighter with a broken nose who did not ask questions. I learned to throw a punch. I learned to take a hit. I learned that physical pain was a luxury because it distracted from the emotional rot. Week by week, the softness of the society wife melted away. My jawline sharpened. My shoulders broadened. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger looking back, a woman made of angles and wire. Dangerous and hard. Then came the wardrobe. Grant loved pastels. He loved me in soft pinks, baby blues, fabrics that yielded to the touch. He wanted a wife who looked like a marshmallow sweet, soft, and easily crushed. I took the train to the Oak Street district, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses to avoid recognition. I walked into the Armani boutique. I did not browse. I knew exactly what I needed. I selected a suit. It was not pink. It was midnight blue, so dark it absorbed the light. The cut was aggressive, with sharp lapels and a tailored waist that emphasized my new strength. I bought stilettos that looked like weapons, 4 inches of black patent leather. I bought sunglasses that covered half my face. I paid with the Nemesis card. The sales associate looked at my hoodie, then at the black card, then back at me. Her demeanor shifted from dismissal to terrified subservience in a single second. Will there be anything else, madam? Have it tailored, I said. I will pick it up in 3 days, and if anyone asks, I was never here. But my transformation was not just cosmetic. I was an architect without a firm. And for a woman like me, that was a form of suffocation. I could not work for anyone in Chicago. Grant had seen to that. So, I decided to become the employer. I instructed Julian to identify a target. We found Archer Design, a boutique firm in the West Loop. It had a brilliant portfolio but was drowning in debt due to mismanagement. The owner, Elias Archer, was a genius artist but a terrible businessman. He was on the brink of bankruptcy. Using the anonymity of the Swiss trust, I bought his debt, all of it. I arranged a meeting with Elias in a private room at a hotel, maintaining my anonymity until the last second. When I walked in, removing my sunglasses, his jaw dropped. Ariana, I heard you were finished. You heard wrong, Elias, I said, sliding a contract across the table. I am not finished. I am just under new management, and so are you. I offered him a deal. Nemesis Holdings would clear his debt and inject $2 million in capital. In exchange, I took 60% ownership. He would remain the face of the company for now. I would be the silent partner, the ghost director, approving every design, every bid, every hire from the shadows. He signed. He had no choice. One condition, I told him as he stared at the check that saved his life. We are going after the River Point contract, the one Sterling and Hearth is bidding on. But that is their flagship project, Elias stammered. Grant and Vanessa are leading the pitch. I know, I said, and we are going to crush them. But they will not know it is me until it is too late. I was rebuilding my empire in the dark, brick by brick, but the final piece of the puzzle, the leverage that would ensure Grant's total destruction, came from Julian. It was a rainy Thursday night when he came to my studio apartment. He did not knock. He scratched at the door like a stray cat. When I let him in, he was vibrating with that chaotic energy that meant he had found something. He threw a stack of spreadsheets onto my small kitchen table. "He is an idiot," Julian announced, cracking a beer he had brought with him. "He is a colossal, arrogance-blinded idiot." "Tell me," I said, leaning against the counter. "Grant's lifestyle," Julian began, pointing a finger at the columns of numbers. "New condo downtown, the lease on the Porsche, the trips to St. Bart's with Vanessa, the jewelry." I ran the numbers. "Ariana, his salary at the firm is $300,000 a year. After taxes and the alimony, he thinks he is not going to pay you. His burn rate is $20,000 a month over his income." "He has savings," I said. "He has family money." "He had family money," Julian corrected. "He spent it. He is leveraged to the hilt. But here's the magic trick. Look at this." He tapped a highlighted entry. "Consulting fee, shell A. Consulting fee, shell B." "He is moving money out of the firm's escrow accounts," Julian whispered, his voice trembling with delight. "Client retainer fees, settlement payouts, waiting to be distributed. He is skimming the interest and moving the principal into shell companies, then paying himself consulting fees to cover his credit card bills. Then he moves it back before the quarterly audit. It is a Ponzi scheme of one." I stared at the numbers. This was not just unethical. This was a felony. This was disbarment. This was prison. "He is stealing from his clients to buy Vanessa Cartier bracelets," I said, the realization settling in cold and heavy. "Exactly," Julian said. "If we take this to the Bar Association right now, he is done. License revoked. Handcuffs by noon." "No," I said instantly. Julian looked at me, confused. "No, Ariana. This is the kill shot. If I trigger this now," I explained, walking to the window to stare at the brick wall, "the firm collapses. His assets get frozen by the feds. The divorce proceedings get halted while the criminal investigation takes precedence. I get nothing. I get stuck in limbo for another 2 years." I turned back to Julian. "I need him to sign the divorce decree first. I need the judge to stamp it. I need to be legally severed from him, with the prenup enforced exactly as he wants it. I need him to think he has won, and that I am walking away with nothing. Once the ink is dry, once I'm free of his debts and his name, then we drop the hammer." Julian smiled slowly. "That is diabolical. I love it." "Keep digging," I ordered. "I want every transaction. I want to know every latte he bought with stolen money. When we hit him, I want the indictment to be longer than a novel." 2 days later, the summons arrived. It was taped to the door of my studio apartment. A thick envelope from the court. Final judgment of dissolution of marriage. The hearing was set for next Tuesday, 10 in the morning. My phone buzzed. It was Grant. "Tuesday, 10 a.m., courtroom 4B. Be there. Ariana, if you do not show, I get a default judgment, and you do not even get the $5,000 charity payment. Bring the keys to the Civic. I have decided to sell it for scrap." Vanessa thinks it is an eyesore parked on the street. I read the text twice. He wanted the keys to the Honda. He wanted to take the last thing I had, the car that had kept me from freezing, just because his mistress thought it was ugly. Something inside me snapped. Not a break, but a locking into place. The final tumbler of the safe falling into position. I looked at the black credit card on the table, Nemesis Holdings. I had played the pauper for weeks. I had eaten ramen and walked in the rain. I had let him believe I was broken. But on Tuesday, I was not going to court as a pauper. I picked up the phone and dialed Julian. "What do you need?" He answered on the first ring. "Where are you?" "I am at the office, tracking Grant's offshore transfers." "Stop," I said. "I need you to make a call. I need you to find a dealership that has a very specific item in stock." "What item?" "A Chevrolet Corvette Z06, I said. "Matte black, red interior, the Z07 performance package. And I need it available for pickup on Monday evening." There was a silence on the other end of the line. "A Corvette?" Julian asked. "Ariana, that is not a subtle car. That is a monster. That is what a midlife crisis drives." "No, Julian," I said, my voice steady and cold. "That is what American muscle looks like. Grant drives a Porsche because he thinks it makes him sophisticated. He looks down on American cars. He thinks they are loud, crude, and lower class." I paused, imagining the look on Grant's face. I am going to show him exactly how loud and crude I can be. I am going to drive that car right up his arrogance and park it on his chest. "Matte black," Julian repeated, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "I will find it. Do you want to finance it?" "No," I said. "Wire the funds. Cash. I want the title in my hand when I walk off the lot." I hung up the phone. I walked to the closet and pulled out the garment bag containing the midnight blue Armani suit. I ran my hand over the fabric. The velvet curtain was about to fall. The show was over, and when the lights came up, Grant Whitaker was going to realize that he had not been watching a tragedy. He had been watching his own execution. The plan was perfect. The suit was tailored. The car was ordered. The legal sharks were circling. I spent Saturday morning in my cramped studio apartment, steaming the wrinkles out of a silk blouse, feeling the adrenaline of imminent victory humming in my veins. I was 48 hours away from the court date that would end my marriage and begin my revenge. Then, there was a knock at the door. It was not the tentative scratch of a neighbor, or the aggressive pounding of a landlord looking for rent. It was a firm, authoritative rap. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. I froze. Julian had a key. Grant would never come to this neighborhood. He was too afraid of getting his Italian loafers dirty. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood in the hallway. He was wearing a beige trench coat that looked slept in, and he had the tired, cynical eyes of a man who hunted people for a living. He held up a badge to the fisheye lens, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. My heart stopped. It literally missed a beat. A cold hitch in my chest that felt like dying. I opened the door 3 inches, keeping the chain latched. "Can I help you?" "Ariana Whitaker," he asked. His voice was like gravel in a blender. "I am Special Agent Miller. I need to ask you a few questions regarding a real estate transaction dated February 20th. The cabin. My mind raced. We had sold the cabin to Julian's contact, a hard money lender, for $58,000. It was a cash deal. Julian had assured me it was clean, but Julian's definition of clean was often legally gray. I am getting divorced," I stammered, leaning into the role of the frazzled victim. "Is this about my husband's taxes?" "You should talk to him. It is not about your husband, Mrs. Whitaker. It is about the sale of a property in Wisconsin to a shell company registered in Delaware. The funds were wired through a series of accounts that we have flagged for potential laundering activity." He paused, watching my face. "May I come in?" I had to let him in. If I refused, I looked guilty. If I let him in, he would see a woman living in squalor. That was my only defense. "Yes," I unlatched the chain. "Please, I have nothing to hide. I just sold my grandmother's house so I could buy groceries." Agent Miller stepped into the studio. He took in the mattress on the floor, the peeling paint, the single cup of instant coffee on the folding table. He did not look impressed. He looked suspicious. "You sold the property for $58,000, Miller said, pulling a notebook from his pocket. "To an entity called Vantage Capital, LLC. Do you know who owns Vantage Capital?" No, I said, hugging my arms around myself. I used a broker. I needed money fast. My husband froze my accounts. I was desperate. Desperate, Miller repeated. That is an interesting word, because Vantage Capital is currently a person of interest in a structuring investigation. They move money for people who do not want to be found, and usually, the people selling to them are trying to hide assets. He stepped closer. The air in the room grew thin. Mrs. Whitaker, are you holding undeclared assets? Because if you are trying to hide liquidity from a divorce settlement, that is fraud. But if you are using a laundering front to move that money offshore, that is a federal felony. I can freeze that $58,000 right now. I can freeze you. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. If he froze the account, I could not pay for the Corvette. I could not pay the lawyers. But worse, if he opened a formal investigation, he would subpoena my financial records. He would see the flight to Zurich. He would see the connection to Nemesis Holdings. If that happened, the $18 million would be exposed, and under Illinois law, since we were still legally married, Grant would be entitled to 50% of it. I looked at Agent Miller. I forced tears into my eyes. It was not hard. The terror was real enough. I do not know what you are talking about, I whispered, my voice trembling. I sold a rotting shack to the first person who made an offer. I have $300 in my pocket. Look around you. Does this look like I'm hiding millions? I am eating ramen noodles. I am sleeping on the floor. My husband threw me out like trash. I grabbed my purse and dumped the contents on the table. Lipstick, coupons, loose change, and a crumpled tissue. Check it, I screamed, letting the hysteria take over. Check everything I'm trying to survive. And you are accusing me of laundering. Take the money. Take it all. I do not care anymore. Miller watched the display. He looked at the cheap lipstick. He looked at the coupons for discount detergent. He hesitated. The cognitive dissonance was hitting him. International money launderers did not usually live in studios that smelled of mildew. I need to verify the broker, Miller said, his tone softening slightly, but the steel remained. I need the paperwork, the deed transfer, the closing statement. If Vantage Capital is a legitimate buyer, you have nothing to worry about. But if I find out that money went anywhere other than your grocery bill, I will be back with a warrant. He handed me a card. You have 24 hours to email me the closing documents, if I do not have them by noon tomorrow. I freeze the account. He left. I locked the door and slid down against it until I hit the floor. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial the phone. Julian, I gasped when he answered. We have a problem. I explained everything. The agent, the threat, the deadline. Vantage Capital. Julian swore loudly on the other end. That idiot. My contact said he used a clean shell. Vantage is his dirty shell. He must have mixed up the wires. Fix it, I hissed. Miller wants closing documents by noon tomorrow. He wants to see a legitimate broker trail. If he digs and finds out Vantage is connected to anything offshore, or if he alerts Grant. I can fix the trail, Julian said, his voice dropping into that hyper-focused monotone he used when he was working. I can backdate a brokerage agreement. I can create a paper trail that makes Vantage look like a standard flipper, but I need time. I have to hack into the county clerk's digital queue to insert the notary stamp. You have until noon, I said. If you fail, Grant gets $9 million of my money. I will kill you, Julian. I will kill you with my bare hands. I am on it. Do not answer the door. Do not answer the phone. Just stay poor. I hung up. I was pacing the room, biting my fingernails. When my phone rang again, I looked at the screen. Grant. I should not have answered. Julian told me not to answer, but I needed to know if he knew, if the IRS had contacted him yet. Hello, I answered, keeping my voice weak. Ariana. Grant's voice was smooth, dripping with false concern. I heard you had a visitor. My blood ran cold. How did he know? I do not know what you mean, I said. My doorman mentioned seeing a federal car parked near that slum you are living in. Grant lied. He was guessing. He was fishing. Or maybe he had hired a private investigator to watch me. Is the government finally catching up with you? I told Vanessa you were unstable. I told her it was only a matter of time before you did something criminal to try and get back at me. I did nothing, I said. It was a mistake. You sound manic. Ariana, Grant said. Breathless? Panicked? Are you taking your medication? Oh, wait. You cannot afford medication. He laughed, a low, cruel chuckle. Listen to me carefully. I have spoken to my partners. If you make a scene in court on Tuesday, if you try to beg for more money, if you cry, I will petition the court for an involuntary psychiatric hold. I will say you are a danger to yourself. I will have you locked up in a state facility. Ariana, and I will get power of attorney over whatever crumbs you have left. You cannot do that, I whispered. I am a partner at the biggest law firm in Chicago, Grant said. I play golf with the judge. I sleep with the daughter of the city's biggest developer. I can do whatever I want. Sign the papers. Ariana, take the $5,000. Go away. Or I will bury you so deep you will never see the sun again. He hung up. I stood in the center of the room. The silence was absolute. On one side, the IRS was ready to seize my freedom. On the other side, my husband was ready to seize my sanity. They were closing in. The walls of the studio felt like they were shrinking, crushing me. For a moment, I considered giving up. It would be so easy. Just sign the papers. Give the Swiss money to charity. Disappear. Then I looked at the garment bag hanging on the closet door. The midnight blue suit. Grant had called me manic. He had threatened to lock me up. He thought I was weak. He had no idea. I sat down at the table. I opened my laptop. I did not cry. I did not panic. I waited. I waited all night, every hour. I checked my email. Nothing from Julian. 2 a.m, the radiator clanked. 4 a.m, a siren wailed in the distance. 6 a.m, the sun began to turn the brick wall outside my window a dull gray. My phone buzzed. Sent. It was a text from Julian. I opened my email. There was an attachment. Closing _ packet _ final, PDF. I opened it. It was a masterpiece of forgery. A brokerage agreement with a reputable local firm. A notarized statement from the manager of Vantage Capital stating the funds were for a speculative renovation project. Emails back and forth negotiating the price. It looked boring. It looked bureaucratic. It looked real. I forwarded it to Agent Miller with a short note. Here are the documents you requested. As you can see, it was a standard sale. Please leave me alone. Then, I waited. 7 a.m, 8 a.m. My phone rang. It was Miller. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. I held my breath. Yes. I received the file. I have verified the broker's license number. It checks out. I let out a breath that felt like a scream. However, Miller added, Vantage Capital is still under investigation. I am not freezing your funds today, but I am keeping this file open. If I see one more dime move in or out of your accounts that looks suspicious, I am coming back, and next time, I won't knock. You won't have to, I said. I am done with money. Agent Miller, I just want my divorce. Good luck with that, he said, and hung up. I dropped the phone. I fell back onto the mattress. I had survived. By the skin of my teeth. By a margin of minutes. I had survived. Grant did not know. The IRS was backing off. The money was safe. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Today was Monday. Tomorrow was Tuesday. Tomorrow was Judgment Day. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but my resolve was iron. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. You are not crazy, I told my reflection. You are not a victim. You are the CEO of Nemesis Holdings. I picked up my phone and dialed the car dealership. This is Ariana Whitaker, I said. Is the car ready? Yes, ma'am. The salesman's voice was eager. Detailed and waiting. We received the wire transfer. When would you like to pick it up? Tonight, I said. And make sure the tank is full. I have a long drive to the courthouse tomorrow. I hung up. The snag had almost strangled me, but it hadn't. And now, there was nothing standing between me and Grant except a courtroom door and 570 horsepower. He wanted to certify that I was insane fine. I would show him exactly how crazy I could get. Monday was a study in contrasts, while I was orchestrating the death of my former life. Grant was celebrating its funeral. Julian had hacked into the internal reservation system of The Gauge, an upscale restaurant on Michigan Avenue frequented by the legal elite. He forwarded me the details. Grant had booked the private dining room for a pre-closing celebration at 1 p.m. The guest list included his senior partners, key clients, and of course, Vanessa. I did not go there. But Julian sent me the audio feed. He had paid a waiter $200 to leave his phone recording on the sideboard. I listened to it as I sat in the Uber heading to the suburbs. "To Grant," a male voice toasted. I recognized it as Michael, one of the managing partners. "For finally cutting the dead weight and upgrading the portfolio." Laughter, glasses clinking. It was easier than I thought. Grant's voice was smooth, lubricated by expensive scotch. "Ariana is sentimental. She thinks if she plays the victim, the world will save her. She does not understand that the world eats victims." "Is she even going to show up tomorrow?" Vanessa asked. Her voice was light, airy, the sound of someone who has never had to fight for anything. "She will," Grant said. "She needs the $5,000. She is destitute. I heard she is living in a studio in Rogers Park. Can you imagine Rogers Park?" More laughter. "She will come in wearing that tragic gray cardigan she loves," Grant continued. "She will cry a little. I will hand her a tissue and a check, and then we can all go to the club. My tea time is at 2. I pulled the earbud out. The anger did not burn anymore. It was cold. It was a block of dry ice in my chest. Dead weight. Tragic. Destitute. He had written the script. He had cast me as the pathetic extra in the movie of his life. I looked out the window. The suburban dealership lot was coming into view. Autobahn luxury performance. I walked into the showroom. It was a cathedral of glass and steel, filled with the smell of tire rubber and new leather. A salesman in a sharp suit looked up. He scanned my attire: jeans, boots, a black hoodie, and his smile faltered. He clearly did not see a buyer. He saw a tire kicker. "Can I help you?" "Miss," he asked, not moving from his desk. "I am here for the Z06, I said. "The matted black one." "Ah," he stood up, smoothing his tie. "That is a serious machine. 755 horsepower. It is a track weapon. Really, most people find it a bit aggressive for the street. Perhaps you would prefer the Cayman over there. It is much more manageable." "I do not want manageable," I said, walking past him toward the back of the showroom, and there it was. It sat under the spotlights like a crouching predator, the Chevrolet Corvette Z06. It was not a car. It was a declaration of war. The paint was a flat, light-absorbing black that looked like stealth bomber plating. The wheels were massive, black spiders of alloy wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires that looked like racing slicks. But it was the interior that made my heart race. Through the window, I saw the seats, adrenaline red leather. It looked like the inside of a heart. Grant hated American cars. He called them crude. He called them loud. He drove a silver Porsche 911 because it was precise, German, and understated. He liked things that whispered. This car did not whisper. This car screamed. "I will take it," I said. The salesman blinked. "Would you like a test drive?" "No, I know exactly what it is." "Okay. Well, we can sit down and discuss financing options. We work with several lenders who might be able to approve you, depending on your credit score." I reached into my bag and pulled out a bank envelope. Inside was a cashier's check drawn from the Credit Suisse correspondent account in New York. $142,000, I said, placing the check on the hood of the Black Beast. "Tax, title, and license included. I want it registered in the name of Nemesis Holdings." The salesman looked at the check. He looked at the amount. He looked at me. The condescension evaporated instantly, replaced by a frantic desire to close the easiest commission of his month. I will get the paperwork started immediately. Ms. Whitaker, can I get you an espresso sparkling water? Just the keys, I said. While they prepped the car, I sat in the waiting area and opened my burner laptop. It was time for the final briefing. Eleanor Stone and her team were assembled in a conference room in New York. I saw them on the screen, 5 lawyers in suits that cost more than my former salary. They looked like a council of war. Ariana, Eleanor said, we are ready. The strategy is ambush. We have filed nothing in the electronic docket yet. We have kept your representation sealed. As far as the court knows, you are appearing pro se representing yourself. Good, I said. Let Grant think he is walking into a slaughter. He is, Eleanor corrected, but not the one he expects. We have the forensic accounting report from Julian. We have the proof of the offshore shells. We have the emails between Grant and Vanessa conspiring to get you fired. We have the prenup. The prenup, I said. That is the key. It is, Eleanor nodded. Grant wrote it to protect his assets, but he wrote it so broadly that it defines separate property as anything acquired solely in one spouse's name, regardless of source, provided it was not commingled in a joint account. Your inheritance from your grandmother, the cabin, was separate property. The proceeds from that sale, the $58,000, were separate property, and the assets you acquired with those proceeds, the shares, I finished, are separate property. Eleanor smiled. Ironclad. He cannot touch the Swiss trust, but we can touch everything of his, because he commingled his illegal funds with marital assets to hide them. He poisoned his own well. So he loses everything, I said, and I keep everything. He loses more than money, Ariana. When we present the evidence of embezzlement to the judge, she will be obligated to refer the matter to the district attorney. Grant is not just looking at poverty, he is looking at prison. I looked at the lawyers on the screen. They were mercenaries, hired guns, but right now, they felt like family. I will see you in Chicago tomorrow morning, Eleanor said. Do not be late. I will be driving, I said. I will be fast. I drove the Corvette off the lot at sunset. The engine did not hum. It growled, a deep, guttural thrum that vibrated through the steering wheel and into my hands. I merged onto the highway. I pressed the gas pedal down an inch. The car lunged forward, snapping my head back against the red leather. It felt like freedom. It felt like power. I drove to a self-storage unit on the outskirts of the city. This was my walk-in closet now. I punched in the code and rolled up the metal door. Inside, hanging in a plastic bag, was the suit. I took it down. The Armani midnight blue tuxedo suit. I ran my fingers over the silk lapel. It was sharp enough to cut glass. I changed right there in the storage unit. I stripped off the jeans and the hoodie, the uniform of the victim. I put on the silk blouse. I stepped into the tailored trousers. I buttoned the jacket. I looked in the mirror propped against the wall. Ariana, the victim, was gone. In her place stood Ariana, the executioner. The suit fit like armor. It made me look taller, broader. My eyes, usually soft and brown, looked hard and black in the dim light. I put on the stilettos. I put on the sunglasses. I was ready. But there was one last thing to do. I drove to the edge of the city, to a small park overlooking the lake. It was dark now. The wind was whipping off the water, cold and biting. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a small stack of photographs. They were the ones I had saved from the apartment before Grant kicked me out. Our wedding photos. A picture of us in Paris, a picture of the day he made partner. I looked at his face in the photos. He looked so handsome, so trustworthy. I remembered the man I thought I had married, the man who held my hand when my mother died, the man who promised to build a life with me. That man never existed. It was a costume Grant wore to get what he wanted. I took a silver lighter from my pocket, a Zippo I had bought at the gas station. I flicked the wheel. The flame danced in the wind. I held the corner of the wedding photo to the fire. The paper curled and blackened. The flame ate Grant's smiling face. It ate my white dress. It ate the lie. I dropped the burning photo onto the concrete and watched it turn to ash. I did the same with the Paris photo. And the partner photo. I watched until there was nothing left but gray flakes swirling in the wind, carried out over the dark water of Lake Michigan. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Grant, do not be late tomorrow. The text read, I do not want to miss my tea time. 10 a.m. sharp. I looked at the ash on the ground. I looked at the black car waiting for me, its engine ticking as it cooled. I did not reply. I got back into the Corvette. I pushed the start button. The V8 roared to life, shattering the silence of the park. I won't be late, Grant, I whispered to the empty car. I'm going to be early. I put the car in gear and drove back toward the city lights. The skyline of Chicago rose up before me, a fortress of glass and steel. Somewhere in one of those towers, Grant was sleeping the sleep of the just and the arrogant. Tomorrow, he would wake up, but tonight, I let him dream, because the nightmare I was bringing was going to last forever. Tuesday morning in Chicago broke with the color of wet slate. The sky was a heavy, oppressive gray, weeping a fine, misty rain that coated the city in a sheen of cold varnish. It was the kind of weather that seeped into the bones, making the towering stone pillars of the Cook County Courthouse look less like monuments to justice and more like the gates of a mausoleum. For most people, this was a day to hurry inside, to collapse umbrellas and shake off the chill, but for Grant Whitaker, the rain was merely a backdrop for his victory lap. He stood at the top of the wide concrete stairs, sheltered by the limestone portico, surrounded by his entourage. He looked every inch the conqueror. He wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored in London, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie the color of a bruise. Next to him stood Vanessa, shivering slightly in a cream-colored dress that was far too thin for the season, but perfect for displaying the diamonds Grant had bought her with stolen money. Around them, 3 junior associates from his firm stood like eager gargoyles, holding briefcases and laughing at jokes that were not funny. They were there to witness the kill. They were there to see the former Mrs. Whitaker, the discarded architect, crawl up these stairs and beg for mercy. I watched them from 2 blocks away. I was sitting in the driver's seat of the Corvette Z06, the engine idling with a low, rhythmic thrum that vibrated through the chassis. The interior smelled of new leather and high-octane fuel. The rain beaded on the matte black hood, looking like sweat on the skin of a predator. I checked the time on the dashboard. It was 9:58 in the morning. "Showtime," I whispered. I did not just put the car in gear. I unleashed it. I slammed the accelerator to the floor. The rear tires, massive slabs of Michelin rubber, fought for traction on the wet asphalt for a split second before biting down. The car launched forward with a violence that pinned me against the adrenaline-red seat. The engine did not just rev. It exploded into a banshee scream, a flat-plane crank howl that echoed off the canyon of skyscrapers. First gear, second gear. The speedometer blurred past 40, 50, 60 miles per hour on the city street. Ahead, the courthouse plaza loomed. The space in front of the stairs was a designated drop-off zone, strictly controlled, usually filled with police cruisers and black-town cars. But right in the center, closest to the stairs, was a spot marked with a reserved cone. I had paid the parking attendant $500 cash 10 minutes ago to place it there. I did not slow down until the last possible second. I swung the steering wheel hard to the left. The Corvette drifted, the back end sliding out in a controlled, terrifying arc across the wet pavement. I corrected the wheel, slammed the brakes, and the car came to a halt with surgical precision, the front splitter stopping exactly 3 inches from the bottom step. The silence that followed was absolute. The roar of the engine died, replaced by the ticking of cooling metal and the soft hiss of the rain. On the stairs, the laughter had stopped. Grant was frozen mid-gesture, a cigarette halfway to his mouth. Vanessa's eyes were wide, staring at the black machine that looked like it had just landed from outer space. The junior associates looked terrified, unsure if this was a terrorist attack or a movie stunt. The driver's side door clicked open. I stepped out. I did not rush. I placed one foot on the wet asphalt. The heel of my black stiletto, 4 inches of lethal patent leather, struck the ground with a sharp clack. I rose to my full height. The Armani midnight blue suit was a masterpiece of tailoring. It hugged my shoulders and waist, projecting a silhouette of pure, sharpened steel. The trousers fell perfectly to the top of my shoes. The silk blouse gleamed faintly in the gray light. I wore oversized black sunglasses that completely obscured my eyes, turning my face into an unreadable mask. I slammed the car door shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet plaza. I walked around the front of the car, my movements fluid and deliberate. I looked up at the group on the stairs. Grant's reaction was visceral. It was a physical collapse of composure. His jaw literally dropped. The muscles in his face went slack, erasing the smug smile that had been plastered there a moment before. The cigarette he had been holding slipped from his fingers and fell to the concrete, rolling down a step, forgotten. He stared at the car. He stared at me. He blinked, as if trying to reboot a brain that had just encountered a fatal error. He was looking for the Honda Civic. He was looking for the gray cardigan. He was looking for the broken woman who pleaded for $5,000. Instead, he was looking at a ghost who had come back as a warlord. Vanessa went pale. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching the diamond necklace. She looked from the Corvette, a car that cost more than her annual salary, to my suit. Then to Grant. Confusion warred with jealousy in her eyes. She had been promised a defeated rival. She was looking at someone who clearly had more money, more style, and more power than she could ever dream of. Is that her?" one of the associates whispered, his voice cracking. Grant did not answer. He could not speak, but the show was not over. Behind me, a black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up to the curb, flanking the Corvette. The doors opened in unison. 5 people stepped out. They were not local lawyers. They were not the kind of attorneys who chased ambulances or handled traffic tickets. These were the partners of Blackwood, Stone and Sterling. They wore bespoke suits that cost $5,000 each. They carried leather briefcases that looked like they contained state secrets. Leading them was Eleanor Stone. She looked terrifying. Her silver hair was immobile in the damp wind, and her expression was one of bored lethality. She walked to my side, flanking me like a Praetorian guard. The other 4 formed a phalanx behind us. The contrast was brutal. Grant stood there with 3 terrified junior associates and a mistress in a cocktail dress. I stood with a matte black supercar and a legal team that could overthrow a small government. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at Grant. The distance between us was only 10 feet, but it felt like an ocean. I reached up and slowly removed my sunglasses. I locked eyes with him. My face was smooth, calm, devoid of any emotion other than a mild, polite amusement. I did not look angry. I did not look sad. I looked like I was arriving for a board meeting where I owned 51% of the voting stock. "Grant," I said. My voice was clear, cutting through the sound of the rain without effort. He made a sound, a strangled sort of croak. "Ariana." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile a shark gives before it drags a seal underwater. "Sorry I'm late, darling." I gestured nonchalantly to the sinister black vehicle behind me. It was a bit hard to find a parking spot for this beast. You know how it is. American muscle can be so wide. Grant's eyes flicked to the car, then back to me. His brain was trying to do the math and failing. $58,000 from a cabin sale did not buy a $140,000 car. It did not buy a $50,000 legal retainer. It did not buy an Armani suit. "What is this?" he hissed, finding his voice at last. "Whose car is that? Who are these people?" "These," I gestured to Eleanor and her team. "This is my counsel. I decided to take your advice. Grant, you told me to get a lawyer, so I got 5. Eleanor Stone stepped forward, adjusting her glasses. She looked at Grant with the kind of disdain usually reserved for insects. "Mr. Whitaker, Eleanor said, her voice like dry ice. I am Eleanor Stone, senior partner at Blackwood, Stone and Sterling. We are representing Mrs. Whitaker in this matter. We have filed our appearance with the clerk electronically as of 2 minutes ago. I assume you are ready to proceed. Grant turned the color of ash. He knew the name. Every lawyer in the country knew the name. Blackwood. Stone and Sterling was the firm you hired when you wanted to burn the earth. This was supposed to be a settlement hearing, Grant stammered, looking at his own lawyers, who were currently trying to make themselves invisible behind a pillar. She is pro se. She has no money. Things change, I said softly. I took the first step up the stairs. Grant flinched, actually taking a step back, as if the physical force of my presence pushed him away. You look tired, Grant, I observed, pausing on the step below him. Did you not sleep well? I slept like a baby. There is something about the hum of a V8 engine that is very soothing. I looked at Vanessa. She was trembling now, her eyes darting between Grant and me. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the man she had stolen was not the alpha male she thought he was. He was prey, and she was standing in the splash zone. Nice dress, Vanessa, I said. Although, silk chiffon in this weather, a bold choice. You look damp. I brushed past them. I did not shove them. I did not need to. The air around me seemed to part, forcing them to step aside. I walked up the remaining stairs, my heels clicking a rhythm of absolute authority. My legal team followed, a silent wall of black wool and leather. At the top of the stairs, I paused and turned back. Grant was still standing there, staring up at me, the rain plastering his hair to his skull, his expensive suit darkening with water. He looked small. He looked confused. He looked like a man who had walked into a knife fight carrying a bouquet of flowers. Are you coming, Grant? I asked. I would hate for you to miss your tea time. Although, looking at the forecast, I glanced up at the gray, weeping sky. I think your game is going to be rained out. I turned and walked through the heavy brass doors of the courthouse. The lobby was cavernous, echoing with the sounds of footsteps and hushed conversations. But as our group moved toward the security checkpoint, the noise seemed to die down. People stopped. Lawyers, bailiffs, defendants. They all turned to look. We moved with a synchronization that signaled power. I placed my purse on the conveyor belt. I walked through the metal detector. It did not beep. I was made of steel, but not the kind the machine could detect. Grant and his group shuffled in behind us a moment later. They looked disjointed, chaotic. Grant was whispering furiously to his lead associate, who was frantically scrolling through something on his phone, likely checking the court docket to confirm that yes, he was indeed facing the Death Star of law firms. We rode the elevator to the 4th floor in silence. Grant refused to look at me. He stared at the floor numbers lighting up. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. Vanessa stood in the corner, trying to make herself small. The elevator dinged. Floor 4. Family court. We stepped out into the hallway. The air smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Courtroom 4B, Eleanor said, checking her file. Judge Patterson. She is strict, efficient, and hates time wasters. This will be fun. We walked to the double doors. I reached out and pushed one open. Inside, the courtroom was quiet. The gallery was empty save for a few bored clerks. The judge's bench was raised high, dominating the room. I walked to the table on the left, the plaintiff's table. Usually, but today, it felt like the commander's desk. I pulled out the chair and sat down. Eleanor sat to my right. The other 4 lawyers took the row behind us, opening their briefcases in unison with a sound like rifles being cocked. Grant walked to the defendant's table. He slumped into his chair, his lawyers huddled around him, whispering in panicked tones. I leaned back in my chair. I crossed my legs. I placed my sunglasses on the table. I looked across the aisle at the man I had shared a bed with for 10 years. The man who had thrown me away. The man who had called me a termite farmer. He looked up. Our eyes met. For a second, I saw the old Grant try to surface the arrogance, the sneer. He opened his mouth, perhaps to say something cutting, perhaps to demand how I had paid for the car. But then he looked at Eleanor Stone, who was calmly arranging a stack of documents that I knew contained the evidence of his embezzlement. He looked at the file labeled Whitaker versus Whitaker, counter petition for fraud and dissolution. He closed his mouth. The sneer died. Fear, cold and genuine, took its place. I winked at him. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. "The Honorable Judge Patterson presiding." The judge swept in, her black robes billowing. She sat down and adjusted her glasses. She looked at Grant's table, then at mine. She paused when she saw the phalanx of high-powered attorneys surrounding me. Her eyebrows went up a fraction of an inch. "Good morning," Judge Patterson said. "We are here for the matter of Whitaker versus Whitaker." I understood this was to be a simple, uncontested settlement hearing. Eleanor Stone stood up. Her voice was smooth, polished, and deadly. "Good morning, Your Honor. Eleanor Stone for the respondent, Ariana Whitaker. And no, Your Honor. I am afraid there has been a significant change in circumstances. We are not here to settle. We are here to amend the petition to include counts of grand larceny, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty." The courtroom went silent. So silent you could hear a pin drop or a career die. I looked at Grant. He had stopped breathing. The judgment day had begun. And I was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The air in courtroom 4B was stagnant, smelling of floor wax and old lies. Judge Patterson sat behind the bench like a gargoyle carved from granite, her eyes magnified behind thick glasses, watching the proceedings with the bored impatience of a woman who had seen every variety of marital dysfunction Chicago had to offer. Grant's lawyer, a man named Bradford who wore a suit that was one shade too light for a courtroom, was midway through his opening statement. He was leaning against the podium, projecting a false sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Your Honor," Bradford droned, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "We are here today to finalize a tragedy. My client, Mr. Whitaker, has been more than generous, despite the respondent's erratic behavior, despite her refusal to vacate the marital home in a timely manner, and despite her current state of financial destitution. Mr. Whitaker is willing to offer a one-time humanitarian payment of $5,000. He paused for effect, looking at the judge. "We understand that Mrs. Whitaker is currently unemployed and living in a substandard studio apartment. We simply want to close this chapter so she can receive the mental health support she clearly requires, and my client can move forward with his life." Grant sat at the defense table, looking solemn. He nodded slowly, playing the role of the benevolent ex-husband to perfection. Vanessa, sitting in the first row of the gallery directly behind him, dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. It was a good performance. It was a shame I was about to burn the theater down. "Is that all, Mr. Bradford?" Judge Patterson asked, glancing at the clock. "Yes, Your Honor. We ask that the court enforce the prenuptial agreement and grant the dissolution immediately." "Ms. Stone," the judge turned her gaze to my table. "Does the respondent have a counterstatement?" Eleanor Stone did not stand up immediately. She took a sip of water. She adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse. She arranged the 3 thick binders in front of her with geometric precision. Then, she rose. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice low but carrying to the back of the room without effort. "Mr. Bradford paints a moving picture. However, it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the facts. My client does not require a humanitarian payment. She does not require $5,000. In fact, she does not require a single penny from Mr. Whitaker's legitimate assets." Grant frowned. Bradford looked confused. "I don't understand," the judge said. "Are you waiving the settlement?" "We are waiving the alimony," Eleanor corrected, "because my client, Mrs. Whitaker, is the sole beneficiary of the Nemesis Trust, a separate property entity established post-separation. Her current liquidity is in excess of $18 million. The The silence that followed was not merely quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the oxygen out of the room. Grant's head snapped toward me so fast, I heard his neck crack. His eyes were wide, scanning my face, looking for the lie. He saw only the Armani suit and the calm, cold smile. 18 million? Bradford stammered. That is impossible. She is unemployed. She sold a shack for $50,000. She monetized a family inheritance, Eleanor said smoothly, which, under the strict terms of the prenuptial agreement drafted by your client, is classified as separate property. Mr. Whitaker was very specific. Your Honor, anything acquired by a spouse through inheritance or derived from separate assets remains solely theirs. We thank Mr. Whitaker for his foresight. Judge Patterson looked at me with new interest. So, if you are not here for money, Ms. Stone, why are we here? We are here for justice, Your Honor, Eleanor said, and to discuss the division of the hidden marital assets. Objection, Bradford shouted. There are no hidden assets. My client's disclosures are complete. Are they? Eleanor picked up the first binder. It landed on the table with a heavy thud. Because according to a forensic audit conducted by our team, Mr. Whitaker has been operating a rather sophisticated shell game. Eleanor walked to the center of the room. She did not look at Bradford. She looked directly at Grant. Your Honor, we have traced 24 separate wire transfers totaling $1.2 million over the last 18 months. These funds were moved from the escrow accounts of Sterling and Hearth funds, belonging to clients, into a shell company listed as Blue Horizon Consulting. Grant's face went from pale to a sick, grayish-green. He gripped the edge of the table. And who owns Blue Horizon Consulting? Eleanor asked rhetorically. She flipped a page in the binder. The registered agent is a corporate service in Delaware, but the beneficiary of the bank account associated with the entity is not a corporation. She turned and pointed a finger at the gallery. It is Ms. Vanessa Sterling. Vanessa let out a small shriek. She shrank back against the wooden bench as every eye in the room turned to her. That is a lie, Grant shouted, standing up. She knows nothing about this. Sit down, Mr. Whitaker, Judge Patterson barked, slamming her gavel. Counsel, continue. We have the bank records, Your Honor. Eleanor handed a sheaf of papers to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Here are the deposits. And here are the expenditures. Cartier jewelry, first-class flights to St. Bart's, a lease on a downtown condominium, all paid for with funds embezzled from the firm's clients. Laundered through Ms. Sterling's account, the judge flipped through the pages. Her face grew harder with every sheet. This is significant, the judge said, her voice turning icy. Mr. Bradford, did you know your client was commingling embezzled funds with marital assets? I had no idea, Your Honor, Bradford stammered, stepping away from Grant as if he were contagious. I was not informed of any outside consulting entities. It is not consulting, Eleanor said, her voice rising for the first time, sharp as a whip crack. It is grand larceny. It is fraud. And because Mr. Whitaker used these funds to maintain his lifestyle during the marriage, he has inextricably mixed dirty money with the marital estate. Grant was hyperventilating. I could see his chest heaving. He looked at the judge, then at me, then at Vanessa. The trap had snapped shut. This is a misunderstanding, Grant wheezed. Ariana is doing this to destroy me. She is vindictive. The money was a loan. Vanessa authorized it. I did not, Vanessa screamed from the gallery. She jumped up, her face red with panic. I didn't authorize anything. He told me it was his bonus money. He told me he was hiding it from his wife so she wouldn't get half. He used my name without asking. You signed the incorporation papers, Grant yelled back. Turning on her, the veneer of the sophisticated lawyer dissolved, revealing the desperate, cornered rat underneath. You wanted the bracelet. You wanted the trip. Don't you dare put this on me. You spoiled little brat. Order. Judge Patterson shouted. "Order in this court." "He is lying." Vanessa was crying now. Ugly, terrified sobs. "He told me he was a partner. He told me he ran the firm. He is a thief." "And you are an accomplice." Grant roared. "Enough." The judge's gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. "Bailiff, remove the woman from the gallery. If she says another word, hold her in contempt." 2 bailiffs moved in on Vanessa. She was practically dragged out of the courtroom, still sobbing, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. The doors swung shut behind her, cutting off her wails. Grant stood alone at his table. His lawyer had retreated to the far bench. His mistress was gone. His reputation was incinerated. He looked at me. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply stared at him with the cold detachment of an architect surveying a building that had been slated for demolition. "Mr. Whitaker," Judge Patterson said. Her voice was quiet, dangerous. "I am looking at evidence of multiple felonies. I am obligated as an officer of the court to refer this file to the district attorney's office and to the State Bar Association immediately." "Your Honor, please," Grant begged, his voice breaking. "If you do that, I lose my license. I lose my job. I can explain." "There is nothing to explain," Eleanor said. She walked back to our table and picked up a single document. She handed it to me. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my midnight blue suit. I walked across the aisle. I stopped 2 feet from Grant. I could smell the sweat on him, the sour scent of fear. "Grant," I said softly. He looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot, wild. "Ariana, please, don't do this. We were married, 23 years. No, 10 years. We had a life." "You burned that life," I said. "You burned it for a girl who just threw you under the bus to save her own skin." I placed the document on the table in front of him. "This is a settlement agreement," I said. "It states that you grant me a full divorce, effective immediately. It states that you admit to financial irregularities within the marriage, giving me sole ownership of the marital home which I intend to sell to pay back the clients you stole from. To save my own reputation by association, it states that you walk away with nothing, no assets, no car, no pension, nothing." Grant stared at the paper. "If I sign this, I am destitute." "Yes," I said. "You are, but here is the alternative." I leaned in closer. "If you sign this right now, and apologize to me on the record, Eleanor will not hand the full forensic dossier to the FBI today. We will let the judge refer the matter, which will take weeks to process. That gives you a head start. You can run, Grant. You can leave Chicago. You can try to disappear before the indictment comes down." "But if you don't sign," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper, "Eleanor makes a phone call, and federal agents will be waiting for you in the lobby before you even get to the elevator." Grant looked at the paper. He looked at the judge, who was watching us with a mixture of disgust and anticipation. He looked at his own lawyer, who shrugged helplessly. "You win," Grant whispered. A tear leaked out of his eye. It was pathetic. "I won a long time ago," I said. "Sign it." He picked up a pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He scribbled his signature on the line. "I am sorry," he choked out, loud enough for the court reporter to hear. "I am sorry, Ariana. I accept your apology," I said, "and I accept your surrender." I took the paper. I handed it to the clerk. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, "we have a signed agreement." "So ordered," Judge Patterson said, banging the gavel one last time. "The dissolution is granted. The referral to the district attorney stands. Mr. Whitaker, I suggest you get your affairs in order. Court is adjourned." Grant collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I did not look back at him. I turned and walked down the center aisle. Eleanor and her team fell in step behind me. The heavy doors swung open. The hallway was empty. The air felt lighter. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. "That was surgical," Eleanor said. a rare smile touching her lips. I have never seen a man decompose that quickly. He was already rotten, I said. I just kicked down the door. We walked out of the courthouse. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of cold, hard blue sky. The sun was trying to push through, reflecting off the wet pavement. My Corvette was waiting at the curb, black and menacing and beautiful. I turned to Eleanor. Send the bill to the Nemesis Trust and add a bonus for the team. Pleasure doing business with you, Ariana. She shook my hand. I got into the car. I started the engine. The V8 roared, echoing off the stone walls of the courthouse. I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw Grant stumbling out of the courthouse doors. He looked like an old man. He looked around, lost, alone. He had no entourage. He had no mistress. He probably didn't even have an Uber account that worked. I put the car in gear. I did not wave. I pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic of the city that was mine again. Grant Whitaker was in the rearview mirror, shrinking with every second, until he was just a speck. And then, nothing. He was gone. I drove toward the lake, toward the horizon, toward the rest of my life. I had $19 million, a thriving business, and a heart made of steel. The winter was over. 30 days is a lifetime in the world of high finance. It is enough time for a stock to crash, for a fortune to be made, and for a man who thought he was a king to find out he was merely a peasant wearing a rented crown. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office on the 42nd floor of the Willis Tower. The city of Chicago sprawled out below me, a grid of steel and light that I used to think was a prison. Now, it looked like a circuit board, and I was the one holding the controls. The sign on the frosted glass door behind me read, Whitaker and Archer Design Group. I had not just bought Elias Archer's failing firm, I had weaponized it. In the last 4 weeks, we had secured 3 major commercial contracts, including the River Point project that Sterling and Harth had considered their birthright. I had walked into that pitch meeting not as a disgraced former employee, but as the owner of the competition. The look on Jonathan Sterling's face when he realized who he was bidding against was worth every penny of the $18 million sitting in my Liechtenstein trust. There was a knock on the door. It opened before I could answer. Julian Vance walked in. He was wearing a suit. It was not an Armani suit. He still refused to wear anything that cost more than $500 on principle, but it was clean, pressed, and actually fit him. He held a tablet in one hand and a kale smoothie in the other. The quarterly projections are in, Julian said. Dropping onto the white leather sofa that retailed for $12,000, we are up 12%. The aggressive acquisition of the supply chain logistics company was a genius move. By the way, we are now sourcing marble for half the price of the competition. I know, I said, turning away from the window. Because I told you to buy it, Julian smirked. Fair point. Also, I have the weekly Schadenfreude report you requested. He tapped the screen of his tablet. Grant Whitaker, Julian read. His tone bored. The Illinois Bar Association formally revoked his license yesterday. The district attorney accepted a plea deal this morning. 18 months of probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution. Since he has no money for restitution, he is filing Chapter 7 bankruptcy next week. And the job? I asked, walking over to my desk. He is working as a consultant for a mid-level logistics firm in Gary, Indiana, Julian said. Basically, he manages spreadsheets for a trucking company. He makes $45,000 a year. I nodded. It was a livable wage. It was enough to rent a small apartment, buy groceries, and pay for heat. It was exactly the life he had tried to force on me. The symmetry was pleasing. And Vanessa? I asked. Ah, the lovely Vanessa. Julian swiped the screen. She did not stick around for the bankruptcy hearings. Apparently, her love for Grant was conditional on his credit limit. She was seen last night at the Violet Hour with a 60-year-old hedge fund manager who is currently under SEC investigation. She has a type. They deserve each other, I said. I sat down at my desk. It was a massive slab of reclaimed black walnut. I looked at Julian. In a romantic comedy, this would be the moment where the music swells. And we realized that we have been in love the whole time. We would kiss, and the screen would fade to black. But this was not a romance. This was a business. Julian was my CFO. He was my confidant. He was the only person in the world who knew the source of my capital. But he was not my lover. We were too sharp, too damaged, and too cynical for that. We were partners in the truest sense of the word. We protected each other's backs because it was profitable, not because it was poetic. Is that all? I asked. One more thing. Julian stood up. The trust officers in Zurich called. They want to know if you want to diversify into Asian markets. I told them to hold off until we stabilize the Chicago expansion. Good call, I said. Keep the powder dry. We might need it. You have a meeting with the Dubai delegation in an hour. Julian reminded me, heading for the door. Do not be late. These guys have more money than God, and they want to build an underwater hotel or something equally ridiculous. I will be there, I said. When the door clicked shut, I sat in the silence of my empire. I picked up a pen. It was a heavy fountain pen, weighted perfectly. I looked at my hand. The same hand that had blistered swinging a sledgehammer in a freezing cabin. The same hand that had shaken while holding a foreclosure notice. It was steady now. I stood up. I needed air. I needed to feel the speed. I took the private elevator down to the executive garage. The valet saw me coming and practically ran to the designated spot. The Corvette Z06 was waiting. It looked even more menacing under the fluorescent lights of the garage. It was a black hole in the shape of a car. I slid into the driver's seat. The red leather embraced me. I pushed the start button, and the V8 barked to life, a sound that echoed off the concrete walls like a warning shot. I drove out into the sunlight. It was a beautiful spring day in Chicago. The sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. The air was crisp. I turned onto Lakeshore Drive. Heading north, this road was iconic. On my left, the skyline of the city rose up like a jagged graph of ambition. On my right, Lake Michigan stretched out to the horizon. Vast and blue and indifferent. I merged into the fast lane. I dropped a gear. The engine roared, and the car surged forward. 70 miles per hour. 80, the city blurred. The wind rushed over the sleek lines of the car. I thought about the woman I used to be. The Ariana who worried about making Grant happy. The Ariana who apologized for taking up space. The Ariana who believed that if she was just good enough, quiet enough, and loyal enough, she would be safe. That woman had died in the cold of the Wisconsin woods. She had frozen to death, and I had left her body in that cabin. The woman driving this car was someone else entirely. She was forged in fire and ice. She was built of scar tissue and steel. She did not ask for permission. She took what was hers. I realized, with a sudden jolt of clarity, that I was not angry anymore. The rage that had fueled me for months had burned itself out, leaving behind something cleaner, lighter. I was free. I was not defined by Grant. I was not defined by my job title. I was not defined by the money in the Swiss account. I was defined by the fact that when the world tried to crush me, I did not break. I pushed back. I slowed down as the road curved near North Avenue Beach. I pulled into a turnout overlooking the water. I put the car in park, but left the engine running. I looked at the city. It was my city now. I had conquered it. My phone rang. The sound cut through the low rumble of the exhaust. I looked at the screen. It was an international number. United Arab Emirates. It was the call I had been expecting. The project Julian had mentioned. The Al Mirage Tower. A $2 billion development that needed a lead architect with vision and a ruthless attention to detail. I stared at the phone. I could let it go to voicemail. I could retire right now. I had enough money to buy an island and disappear. I could spend the rest of my life drinking mimosas on a beach, never looking at a blueprint again. But then I looked at my reflection in the rear-view mirror. I saw the sharp lines of the Armani suit. I saw the fire in my eyes. Retirement was for people who were finished. I was just getting started. I picked up the phone. "This is Ariana Whitaker," I said. My voice was strong, commanding, the voice of a woman who owns the room before she even enters it. "Ms. Whitaker," a man's voice said, thick with an accent and heavy with authority. "We have reviewed your portfolio. We have heard of your recent acquisitions in Chicago. We are looking for someone who understands that architecture is not just about shelter, it is about power. Are you interested?" I looked out at the horizon. Where the blue of the sky met the blue of the water, it was wide open, unbridled, limitless. "I am listening," I said, "but my fee has gone up." "We expected nothing less," the man said. "When can you start?" "I am on my way," I said. I hung up the phone. I smiled. It was a real smile this time. Not the shark smile I gave Grant in court, not the polite smile I gave clients. It was the smile of a woman who had looked into the abyss and found that she could fly. I put the Corvette into first gear. I gripped the leather steering wheel. "Let's go," I whispered. I slammed the accelerator. The tires shrieked, biting into the pavement. The engine roared, a symphony of American horsepower that drowned out the noise of the city, the past, and the ghosts of everyone who had ever underestimated me. The black car shot forward, a streak of darkness cutting through the light, racing toward a future that I would build with my own 2 hands. Grant Whitaker thought he had left me with nothing. He was right. He left me with a blank page, and I had just written a masterpiece. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a wild ride from the freezing woods of Wisconsin to the high-speed lanes of Lakeshore Drive. And I hope you enjoyed every twist and turn of Ariana's revenge. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city like Chicago, a quiet cabin in the woods, or somewhere halfway across the world? Please drop a comment below and let me know your location and what you thought of Ariana's final victory. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Scarlet Revenge Stories so you never miss a new episode. Hit that like button if you think Grant got what he deserved. And please smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that the best revenge is massive success. See you in the next story.